They didn't call me disruptive in a meeting. They put it in writing. Right after I asked a question that should have had a simple answer. We were on a forecast call. Finance, revenue ops, my manager, a couple directors. Normal. Boring. The kind of weekly ritual where everyone pretends the spreadsheet is telling a clean story. My job was to sanity check that story before it got handed to the executives like truth. On the screen, churn was down, retention was up. Expansion revenue climbed like a staircase. Steady, perfect, almost beautiful. But cash collections were flat, not crashing, not spiking, just flat. The kind of flat that quietly says this growth is being performed, not lived. So I did what I always do. I asked the question, can someone walk me through why churn is improving so sharply while collections aren't moving? That was it. No accusation, no drama. Just a request for reconciliation. The room went quiet in a way I'd never heard before. Not the normal thinking quiet. This was different. People stopped looking at the screen. I could almost hear keyboards stop clicking. Someone cleared their throat like they were trying to reset the air. Then my manager, Dan, gave me that smile managers use when they're trying to make a problem sound like a personality quirk. Let's take that offline, he said. I nodded. I didn't argue. I even wrote it down like a good soldier. But here's the thing about offline. Offline is where accountability goes to die. After the call, I did the polite thing. I sent Dan a short follow-up email. Not emotional, not long. I attached the screenshot of the dashboard, my reconciliation notes, and one simple request. Just so finance can document the metric definition correctly, are we counting pending renewal as retained? Because that was the hinge. I'd noticed cancellations sitting in a bucket called them pending renewal. Not signed, not negotiated, not a real renewal, just parked, like a car left running. If you park enough cancellations in a pending category, churn looks better without changing reality. It's not complicated, it's just dishonest. Dan replied fast. Good catch. We're aligning definitions across teams. Don't worry about it. Aligning. That word sat in my inbox like a warning label. I'd been at the company long enough to know the language. Aligning meant someone with power wanted the story to stay clean. And if the story stayed clean, the funding round stayed clean. And if the funding round stayed clean, the people at the top stayed rich. I tried to give them every benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a temporary categorization issue. Maybe the renewal pipeline really was that strong. Maybe sales had turned into miracle workers overnight. So I went into the data warehouse and pulled the raw billing exports myself, the same way I always do when something feels off. I tied cancellations to revenue schedules. I checked the timestamps on reclassifications. I compared what customers had actually signed to what our internal dashboards were calling retained. And I kept seeing the same pattern. Once a customer submitted a cancellation notice, the contract didn't always get marked canceled. It got moved quietly, late in the day, sometimes after normal hours, always into pending renewal. I wasn't hunting fraud. I was hunting truth. That's what I told myself anyway. I didn't blast anyone. I didn't post in Slack. I didn't go nuclear. I went to Evan. Evan ran revenue operations, and he loved being the person who owned the numbers. He was smooth, confident, the kind of leader executives trusted because he spoke in outcomes instead of evidence. I asked for 10 minutes. I showed him the mapping. I showed him the contract statuses. I kept my voice calm. Evan leaned back, glanced once at my screenshots, and smiled like I'd brought him a small inconvenience. We're not getting lost in definitions, he said. We're driving the business. I'm not asking for philosophy, I said. I'm asking which bucket a cancellation belongs in. He tilted his head. You're making this bigger than it is. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. Your job is to support alignment. Support alignment, not verify reality, not protect controls. Just support. I left his office with my face neutral, but my thoughts were loud. If everything was clean, nobody would need to say alignment that many times. That afternoon, I had another meeting, forecast prep with finance leadership. I didn't plan to speak up again. I just wanted to listen, gather context, make sure I hadn't misunderstood something. But the churn slide came up again. The celebration tone returned. Evan spoke like a preacher. "This is discipline. This is execution," he said. "This is why investors trust us." And before I could stop myself, I asked, quietly, carefully, "Are we counting pending renewal as retained? Because I'm still seeing cancellations sitting there." Evan laughed, a small laugh, controlled, like he was training the room how to react to me. "We're not going to nitpick definitions in this forum," he said. Then he looked directly at Dan, my manager, like he was handing him a responsibility. Dan repeated it, almost word for word. "Let's take it offline." I didn't push, again, because pushing in the room would have made me emotional. That's how it works. The moment you insist on clarity, they call you difficult. The moment you insist in front of witnesses, they call you disruptive. I went back to my desk and wrote everything down in a private work journal. Time, attendees, phrasing. Not because I thought I'd need it in court. Because I'd learned the hard way that memory is a weak defense against people who control the narrative. Later that evening, I saw a new email notification. It was a reply all to the thread I'd started with Dan. Except I wasn't just talking to Dan anymore. Evan had joined the thread. He had added people. He had copied HR. And right there, in black and white, he wrote, "Your repeated challenges are becoming disruptive. We need alignment, not friction." I stared at the word disruptive until it stopped feeling like language and started feeling like a weapon. Because it wasn't feedback. It wasn't coaching. It was a label placed on me on purpose in front of HR, so that anything I did next would be filtered through that word. I didn't reply right away. I took a breath. I saved the email as a PDF. I forwarded it to my personal legal folder, the way my employment attorney friend once advised me to do, just in case. I checked the company policy on reporting concerns. I checked it twice. Then my calendar refreshed. A new invite appeared for the next morning. No agenda, no notes. Just a title that made my blood run cold. Quick sync, professional conduct and communication. HR, Dan, Evan. And sitting there right under the invite, a small line that felt like the start of something irreversible. Attendance required. I didn't know what they were going to say in that room, but I knew exactly what they were trying to do. They weren't fixing the numbers. They were fixing the person who noticed them. HR meetings are never about truth. They're about creating a paper trail that makes truth irrelevant. The next morning, I walked into a small conference room with glass walls and a camera in the corner that everyone pretended didn't exist. HR was already there, Melissa, neat blazer, calm smile, laptop open like she was about to grade an exam. Dan sat beside her, shoulders slightly hunched, hands folded. Evan was across the table, relaxed, like this was a meeting he'd already won. Melissa started with that soft tone people use when they're about to hurt you and want to feel professional about it. "Thanks for joining," she said. "This is a coaching conversation." Dan nodded without looking at me. Evan smiled. Melissa continued, "We've received feedback about your communication style, specifically that you're creating friction and challenging leadership in ways that are destabilizing." Destabilizing, like I was a defective bolt in a machine. I kept my face neutral. "What did I say that was destabilizing?" Melissa glanced at her screen. "It's more about pattern than a single comment." Of course it was. A pattern is harder to defend against because it's vague enough to fit whatever they need. Evan finally spoke. "You're smart," he said, like he was complimenting me. "That's not the issue. The issue is how you use it. You question decisions in public, and it undermines confidence." "I asked for a definition," I said, "on a metric that finance needs to document." Evan's smile didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "You didn't ask. You implied we were misrepresenting." "That wasn't my intent," I said. "But if the numbers are accurate, then clarifying should be easy." For the first time, Dan looked up, and I saw it in his face. A warning, not to Evan, to me. Melissa slid a printed document across the table. It had my name at the top and a title that tried to sound harmless. Communication Improvement Plan. Not a formal performance plan, not technically disciplinary, just a preloaded weapon they could upgrade later. I read the bullets. Challenges leadership decisions publicly. Fixates on details over outcomes. Creates unnecessary friction across teams. Fails to align with cross-functional leadership. I looked up. This is because I asked why churn and collections don't match. Melissa's expression stayed smooth. This isn't about the numbers. There it was again. The line that proves it's about the numbers. Evan leaned forward a little. Let me be direct, he said. We're entering a sensitive period. Investors, board visibility, quarterly pressure. We need unity. Unity, another word that means obedience. So what exactly do you want from me? I asked. Melissa answered, we want you to route all metric questions through Dan first, and we want you to avoid challenging definitions in group settings. In other words, stop leaving footprints. I nodded once. Okay, then I'll need the definition in writing, so finance can apply it consistently. Evan's jaw tightened slightly, and he answered too fast. You don't need it in writing, he said. You just need to execute. Melissa stepped in quickly. We can document high-level guidance later. For now, we're focusing on communication. Dan finally spoke. Just take a step back, he said quietly. Let me handle it. I didn't argue. I signed the plan. Not because I agreed with it, because refusing would have turned a coaching conversation into a disciplinary incident. I'd seen this game before. I left the room with my dignity intact, but I could feel the cage being built around my role, and they built it fast. Within a day, I was removed from the weekly forecast distribution list to reduce noise. My access to the metrics folder was changed from edit to view only to protect integrity. A Slack message went out from Dan to the finance team. Please route any churn definition questions through me until further notice. It was small, polite, normal looking, but the effect was immediate. People stopped asking me things. Meetings became quieter around me. When I walked into a room, conversations paused half a beat, and then resumed in a different direction. They weren't firing me. They were making me irrelevant. And then the worst part happened. They started rewriting the story about me. A director I barely knew stopped by my desk and said, Hey, just checking in. Everything okay? Heard you've been pretty intense lately. I felt my stomach drop. Who said that? He shrugged like it wasn't important. Just general chatter. General chatter doesn't happen by accident. It gets planted. That afternoon, Priya, the junior analyst I'd mentored for months, sent me a message that was one sentence long. I don't know if I should tell you this, I replied. Tell me in person. She came to my desk, eyes flicking around like she was afraid the walls had ears. She whispered, Evan told me to move cancellations into pending renewal until after close. I kept my voice low. Did he say why? He said it's temporary, she said. He said it's just timing. He said everyone does it. I watched her hands fidget with her badge lanyard. This wasn't gossip. This was fear. Did he put it in writing? I asked. She shook her head quickly. No, he said not to. I paused, then said, Okay, we're not going to argue with him verbally. We're going to clarify. She frowned. Clarify how? Email, I said. Polite? Short? Just a confirmation request. Her eyes widened. He'll hate that. He already hates documentation, I said. That's the point. She hesitated, then opened a draft email she'd already typed earlier and never sent. Like part of her knew she needed proof, even if she didn't want to admit it. We tightened the wording together, careful and professional. Hi, Evan. Just confirming for quarter close. You want us to classify customers who submitted cancellation notices as pending renewal until the close date, correct? She hit send. 3 minutes later, Evan replied. One line. Do not put this in email. Just do what I asked. No denial, no correction, no explanation. Just control. I stared at the screen until my brain finished processing what my instincts already knew. That message wasn't a mistake. It was an instruction to conceal. And suddenly the disruptive label made perfect sense. It wasn't punishment for my tone. It was preemptive defense against my evidence. I didn't react outwardly. I didn't slam my chair back. I didn't storm into anyone's office. I did the quiet adult thing that changes outcomes in real corporations. I saved the email thread as a PDF. I took a screenshot with timestamps. I wrote a brief summary of how it happened while it was still fresh. Then I opened the company's code of conduct page and found the section titled something like Reporting Concerns. There was an ethics hotline number. There was a web form. There was language about non-retaliation that looked good on paper and rarely held up in practice. My finger hovered over the mouse, and then my calendar refreshed again. A new invite popped up for next week. Leadership alignment check-in. Evan, Dan, HR. No agenda. Just another closed-door room with glass walls and no witnesses. I stared at it and realized something that hit harder than fear. They weren't going to stop, not unless someone bigger than Evan forced them to. And if I waited until they fired me, the narrative would already be written. So that night, I filed the report. Not emotional, not dramatic, just facts, dates, definitions, screenshots, and one sentence that mattered. A senior leader instructed an analyst to reclassify cancellations, to improve churn optics, and explicitly told them not to document it in email. After I submitted it, the screen said, "Thank you. Your report has been received." I sat in silence for a long moment, because I knew what came next. Once you put a truth into a system like that, it doesn't just sit there. It moves. And people who built their careers on a story start doing whatever it takes to protect it. By Monday morning, I could feel the building treating me like a contagion. Not openly, not dramatically, just in the small, consistent ways that make you doubt your own reality. People stopped asking me for quick sanity checks. A director who used to wave me into conference rooms started forgetting to add me. My name disappeared from threads where my role hadn't changed. Even the weekly finance stand-up, something I'd attended for over a year, suddenly had a smaller invite list for efficiency. Efficiency, another word that means control. I told myself it was temporary, that the company was just tense because of quarter close, that the ethics report would quietly land in the right hands, get reviewed, and then the adults would step in. But the first adult who stepped in wasn't audit. It was my manager. Dan booked a one-on-one with me and showed up with that tired, careful look people get when they've decided which side of the boat they're sitting on. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask what I'd found. He said, "You need to stop." I kept my voice calm. "Stop what?" "Escalating," he said, like the word tasted sour. "Evan feels like you're trying to make him look bad." "I'm trying to make the numbers match reality." Dan rubbed his forehead. "This is above my pay grade. Just let it go." That was the moment something in me shifted. Because it wasn't just Evan anymore. It wasn't even just Dan. It was the system protecting itself. I realized that alignment wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the product, and I was the defect. That afternoon, I got the first sign that my report had moved. A message from an internal audit mailbox. Generic address, generic signature, but the wording was precise. "Thank you for raising your concern. Please preserve any relevant records, and do not discuss this matter with others while we review." It was short, professional, cold, but it made my chest loosen just slightly. Someone had read it. Someone had taken it seriously enough to tell me to preserve records. And that's when Evan's retaliation got sharper, like he could smell the review before he could see it. The next day, an email went out from Revenue Ops with a clarified churn definition. It looked official. It had polished language. It also quietly redefined pending renewal as a retained status for operational reporting continuity. Continuity. A word that sounds responsible until you realize it's being used to cover a lie. Then Evan did something that made my blood run cold. He started setting the stage to blame me. In a meeting I wasn't invited to, one I only learned about later, Evan told finance leadership that unauthorized data pulls had created confusion and that some analysts were manipulating interpretations to stir internal conflict. I heard it from a coworker in FP&A who trusted me enough to warn me. "Just letting you know," she said quietly, "your name is being floated like you're the problem." I didn't react outwardly. I thanked her. I wrote down the date and her phrasing in my work journal. Then I did the one thing you can do when someone starts building a narrative around you. I checked permissions and logs. Not hacking, not anything dramatic. Just standard corporate reality. I pulled my own access history from the IT portal. I exported the list of folders I could and couldn't modify. I took screenshots that showed my permissions were view-only on the churn mapping files, since HR's coaching conversation. If Evan tried to claim I altered definitions, the system itself would contradict him. And I didn't do it because I wanted to fight. I did it because I could feel the trap closing. 2 days later, Dan sent me another calendar invite. Check in, communication follow-up. Same players as before. HR Dan. Evan, no agenda. When I joined, Yvonne was already talking, not yelling, not threatening, calm, polished, like a man practicing testimony. "We need to address your ongoing behavior," he said. "You're continuing to create instability." I asked, "What behavior, specifically?" Melissa from HR jumped in with a list that sounded rehearsed. Questioning leadership's integrity, creating fear in junior staff, undermining cross-functional trust. I stared at her. "Creating fear?" Evan leaned back. "You've been pressuring people for screenshots. You're pushing your team into documentation spirals. It's disruptive." For a second, I almost laughed, because the audacity was perfect. He had told Priya not to put his instruction in email, and now he was accusing me of creating fear because she documented it anyway. I kept my voice even. I asked for confirmation on a material reporting definition. "That's standard practice." Evan's eyes narrowed. "Not when it becomes obsession." Obsession, disruptive, destabilizing, instability. They weren't describing actions, they were painting a personality. I could feel something heavy settle in my stomach, not panic, clarity. This wasn't a process disagreement. This was an eviction. The meeting ended with Melissa saying, "We expect immediate improvement." Dan added, "Just focus on your assigned tasks." Evan smiled like it was settled. After the call, I sat at my desk and realized I was watching the company choose optics over controls in real time. And I also realized something else. If I stayed inside their narrative, I would lose no matter what the truth was. So I stepped outside it. That evening, I called someone I trusted. Tom, a former controller I'd worked with years earlier. The kind of person who'd survived executive politics without becoming cynical. I laid out the facts, the reclassification, the instruction not to document, the HR labeling, the isolation. Tom didn't sound surprised. He said, "They're going to fire you and call it culture. That's the playbook." "What do I do?" I asked. "Make it impossible for them to pretend it's just you," he said. "Escalate to the audit committee, in writing, factual. Attach evidence, and get advice from an employment attorney before they move." I stared at my kitchen wall after we hung up, thinking about how quickly my life had become a sequence of documents. Then I opened my laptop and started writing a memo. Not an email, a memo. 2 pages, clear headings, dates, bullet points. No emotion, no accusations beyond what evidence supported. I wrote, the dashboard definitions changed without documentation. Cancellations were being reclassified into pending renewal. A senior leader instructed an analyst to do this and explicitly told them not to document it. After I raised concerns, I was labeled disruptive and removed from distribution lists and edit access. I attached the email thread. I attached the permission screenshots. I attached the clarified definition email from revenue ops that quietly legalized the lie. And before I sent it, I paused. Because there's a moment in every corporate story where you understand the cost of pressing the button. Once you send something like that, you don't get to go back to being just an employee. You become a problem the company must solve. I sent it anyway, addressed to the audit committee chair through the formal escalation channel, with internal audit included. Then I closed my laptop and sat there in the silence. Not heroic, not proud, just aware, because I could already feel what was coming. And I didn't know it yet, but the next message I received would tell me whether the company still had any adults left in the room. The audit committee reply didn't come as a long message. It came as a calendar invite. Internal audit interview. Confidential. No fluff. No smiley language. Just a time slot, a conference room, and a note that made my stomach tighten. Please bring any relevant documentation. I walked into that room the next morning and immediately knew this wasn't HR theater. 2 auditors, 1 laptop, 1 legal pad. No small talk. They didn't ask me how I felt. They asked me what I could prove. Start from the beginning, one of them said. Timeline, names, specific instructions. What changed and when. So I gave them the sequence. Calm voice, clean facts. I showed them Evan's email telling Priya not to document. I showed them the churn definition update that appeared right after my questions. I showed them my permission history, how my access had been reduced after HR labeled me disruptive. The auditors didn't react, not because they didn't care, because they were trained not to. They asked, who has authority to change the category mapping? Where is the approval trail for this definition change? Do you know whether any external reporting relied on this churn figure? Have you been threatened directly? I answered exactly. When I didn't know, I said I didn't know. Then one of them closed his notebook and said, "Do not discuss this with anyone." I nodded. I walked out and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not relief, momentum. But that momentum didn't stay quiet. Because the same afternoon, the company started behaving like a house that just smelled smoke. The weekly forecast meeting was canceled due to scheduling conflicts. The CFO stopped responding to emails. A sudden permissions review ticket appeared in the IT system for finance folders. And the CEO sent a company-wide note about tightening operational rigor and strengthening reporting discipline. All words that sound good until you realize they mean someone got scared. By Thursday, the fear had a face. Evan. He caught me near the kitchen when nobody else was close enough to hear. He smiled, but it was thinner now, the kind of smile that needs practice. "Heard you've been busy," he said. I kept my tone neutral. "I've been doing my job." "No," he said softly. "You've been making this personal." "I've been making it documented," I replied. That was the first time his confidence slipped. Just a fraction, a blink too long, a jaw muscle that tightened and didn't relax. Then he leaned in, voice still calm. "You keep pushing, and you're going to force the company into decisions it doesn't want to make." I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. That night, Dan called me. Not a meeting invite, an actual phone call, which was rare. "Look," he said, voice low, "I'm trying to help you. You need to stop sending things up the chain." "I didn't send anything to you," I said. "I know," he replied quickly, too quickly. "I'm saying people are noticing, and it's not going to end well." "For who?" I asked. Silence. Then Dan said, "Just be careful." He hung up, and I sat there staring at my wall because the message was clear. They weren't going to fix the numbers. They were going to remove the person who wouldn't stop pointing at them. The next morning, my badge didn't work at the finance floor. I tapped it once. Red light, again, red. I tried a different door, same. Security approached like they'd been waiting, not aggressive, professional. "Hey," the guard said. They asked us to escort you to a room. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't do anything that could be written down as unstable. I walked with him, holding my laptop bag, and the whole time I could feel people watching without looking. That particular office instinct, something is happening and I don't want my name anywhere near it. The room they brought me to was the same one HR had used before. Glass walls, camera, water bottles placed like props. Melissa from HR was there. Dan was there, pale and quiet, and Evan sat off to the side like this was entertainment. Melissa slid a document across the table. "Today is your last day," she said in that same controlled tone. "We've determined this role is no longer a fit." I looked down. Reason: workplace disruption and failure to align with leadership. I almost felt impressed. They really committed to the script. I looked up at Melissa. Is this because I questioned churn definitions? Melissa didn't answer directly. This decision is based on behavioral patterns. Evan finally spoke, calm as ever. "It's culture," he said. "You're not a culture fit." I nodded once, slowly. Then I said, "Okay." They looked relieved, like they expected a fight and got compliance. I let that relief sit in the air for a second. Then I added, I'll need a copy of the separation terms, and I'll be preserving records for counsel." The room changed. Dan's eyes flicked to Evan. Melissa's fingers paused over her keyboard. Evan's smile faltered, just for a moment. "Counsel?" he repeated, like it was an overreaction. "For retaliation," I said evenly. "For being labeled and isolated immediately after reporting a controls issue. For being removed from access and distribution lists. For termination timing." Melissa tried to steer it back to process. "You're free to consult anyone you'd like. We're offering you a standard package." "Good," I said. "Then you'll have no issue issuing a document preservation notice, especially around revenue classification, churn definitions, and access logs." Nobody spoke, because everyone in that room understood what those words meant in real life. Outside eyes. And outside eyes don't care about culture. They care about evidence. Security walked me to my desk. I packed quietly. No dramatic goodbyes. Just a box, a last glance at the monitors, and the strange calm that comes when you realize the worst thing already happened. At home, I didn't rage. I didn't post. I didn't spiral. I called an employment attorney that Tom recommended. I told him the facts. I sent him the memo, the emails, the permission screenshots, and the termination document. He listened, then said, "You did the right thing by documenting. Now we move carefully." Within a day, he sent a letter to the company requesting preservation of records and an explanation for the termination timing given the report to internal audit. 2 mornings after that, my phone buzzed with a message from an old coworker. Short, no greeting. They just issued a litigation hold. My chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from something sharper. Because a litigation hold means legal told everyone to stop deleting. It means someone at the top finally realized this wasn't an HR problem anymore. It was a due diligence problem, and that's when the chaos turned into something else entirely. That afternoon, I got another email, this one from a different address, not internal audit. Legal. Please do not contact current employees. All communications should go through counsel. I stared at it for a long moment, because I understood what it meant. They weren't trying to coach me anymore. They were trying to contain the damage. And if they were containing damage, it meant the fire had already reached something valuable. 3 weeks after they walked me out with a cardboard box, my former coworker texted me 2 words. Badge revoked. No name, because he didn't need one. Evan. At first, I didn't feel triumph. I felt confirmation. Like the world had finally agreed to follow the same rules I'd been living by. Then another message came in the next day. They're interviewing everyone. Audits pulling logs. That's the part people don't understand about corporate karma. It isn't lightning, it's process. When internal audit gets forced to act, when the audit committee is watching, when legal issues a preservation notice, everything becomes painfully literal. Who clicked what? When? From which account? With whose approval? What changed after hours? What got reclassified right before close? And logs don't care how charismatic you are in meetings. A week later, Priya called me. Not a message. A call. Her voice was tight, like she'd been holding her breath for a month. "I did the interview," she said. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I think so," she replied. They asked me to walk them through the email, the one where he told me not to document. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "They already had it," she added. "They just wanted me to say it out loud." That was the first moment I felt the satisfaction people expect from stories like this. Not the petty kind, the clean kind. Because once the truth is in the room, spoken plainly, it stops being a personality conflict. It becomes a control failure. And control failures have consequences. The company didn't announce anything publicly right away. They never do. They try to contain it, phrase it, soften it. Internally, though, the cracks spread fast. The CFO stopped hosting forecast reviews. The revenue ops team went quiet. A process improvement meeting got scheduled, then quietly canceled, then rescheduled with legal attached. The CEO sent one of those all-hands emails about values and integrity, the kind that always shows up after integrity has already left the building. Then one morning, I got an email from my attorney. They want to talk settlement, not because they suddenly respected me, because they had discovered they couldn't bury the timeline. HR had labeled me disruptive immediately after I raised a material reporting concern. They had reduced my access. They had isolated my role. Then they terminated me while audit review was active. It wasn't subtle. It was stupid. The settlement meeting happened over video. No dramatic courtroom, no shouting, just counsel, documents, and careful language. Their lawyer used phrases like mutual separation and differences in communication style. Mine responded with dates and attachments. In the end, it came down to three things that mattered to me. A neutral reference in writing, severance that reflected the actual risk they created, and removal of the word disruptive from my personnel file and internal systems. When they agreed to that last one, I felt something unclench in my chest that I didn't realize had been locked. Because money is useful, but reputation is oxygen. A month later, an investor update leaked, not to the public, just inside the industry. It was the kind of quiet statement that says everything without admitting guilt. The company was refining churn reporting methodology and strengthening controls, ahead of strategic financing. Refining, strengthening, always the same polite words. But internally, people told the truth in simpler language. They got caught. Evan didn't return. There was no farewell message. No, we thank him for his contributions. Just absence and a new interim leader who didn't speak in slogans. Then the CFO resigned to pursue other opportunities. When people say that in a company, it usually means the board stopped believing them. Priya left 2 weeks after that. She texted me on her last day, "I couldn't stay, but I'm glad you didn't back down." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Neither could I. The strangest part was how quiet my own life became once the fight ended. For months, my brain had been running like a machine that couldn't shut off, always scanning, always anticipating the next move. When the pressure disappeared, it left a hollow space. Not emptiness, just silence. In that silence, I realized how close I'd come to letting them rewrite me. If I'd stayed quiet, I would have kept my job longer. I would have kept my paycheck. I would have kept the illusion of stability. But I would have lost something else, the ability to trust my own judgment. A few weeks later, I interviewed at another company. Different industry, same need for people who can read numbers without flinching. They asked me, "Tell us about a time you handled conflict with leadership." I didn't perform. I didn't turn it into a revenge monologue. I gave them the clean version. I found an inconsistency. I documented it. I escalated through policy. And I protected the company by insisting the metrics match reality. When I finished, the hiring manager didn't look uncomfortable. He looked relieved. He said, "That's exactly why we're hiring." I started there the next month. On my first week, my new manager asked me to review a dashboard definition and said casually, "If something doesn't reconcile, tell me. I'd rather know early." I went back to my desk and just sat for a second, letting that sentence land. No alignment. No take it offline. No HR language disguised as discipline. Just a simple respect for reality. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it. I don't. Because when they labeled me disruptive, it was never about my tone. It was about the fact that I wouldn't participate in a story built to survive due diligence instead of truth. And in the end, the story didn't survive anyway. The numbers did what numbers always do. They stayed honest, long after the people weren't.